Starting from the left, Richard Elkington, Professor of Photography at Providence College. Next to him is our well-known photographer, judge, speaker, Ray Gillette. And to my left is Boston-based fine art and commercial photographer, Lou Jones. I would like to welcome them on your behalf. For the next hour or so, we will talk about photography, different dimensions, different aspects. But I would like to open the session with a few quotations, the owners of which would like us to forget them. They are significant because they are so nearsighted. Who the hell wants to hear actors talk? By H.M. Warner or Warner Brothers. Everything can be invented, has been invented. Commissioner of U.S. Patent Office. Drill for oil? You mean drill into the ground to try and find oil? You're crazy. Drillers who Edwin Drake tried to enlist to his project to drill for oil in 1859. We, of course, know the rest is history. And then, finally, there is no reason anyone would want a computer in their home. This is by Ken Olsen, the president, chairman, and founder of the Digital Equipment Corporation, Mighty DEC, in the 1970s, 80s. They are now defunct. Now, the reason I mentioned these quotations is to show you that when we approach a lot of things, life, photography, we need to keep an open mind. In fact, it is one's ability to open his or her mind that will allow better visualization and better seeing. I have outlined for myself, and I briefly discussed it with our guests, several areas for discussion. We will follow it in a more or less free-flowing conversation, and afterwards you will get a chance to ask questions. Now, I want to start with a very simple, or at least seemingly simple question. Why do people photograph? Why do we photograph at all? We all have our reasons, but let's talk a little bit about the reasons for photography. Let me start with you, Lou.
See these eyes, deer caught in headlights. You asked this question at dinner this evening, and I told you it was provocative and a little difficult. In the brief time since then, I think that most of us, at least the people that I come in contact with in general, are photographing for reasons that are about wanting to do something else other than sort of their day-to-day life. Now they can become professional and this becomes their life, but it's sort of like gardening. You know, why do we garden? You know, or maybe raising a puppy, or painting our house, or something like that, decorating. I know that sounds simplistic, but basically we're trying to, I think, most people that go off and they try photography, they may try several other kinds of art forms to express themselves a little bit, and it becomes an ever, they get rewards. If you're a painter or a sculptor, it can be very difficult to acquire some technique, how to hit a chisel and make a piece of rock fall away, or a piece of wood or fall away, or even to paint, to understand anatomy, and it may take a long time, but photography is sort of like, it has a little bit more of an instant gratification. We can attempt it. We get a little bit something back from us, even from early times, you know, especially when Polaroid, we got a big surgence of people coming into it. And I think that we can find a way. Now, the real reason, though, is, at least from my, and I'm talking about myself personally, was that it was an expression of myself. It was an expression of Or you know that I don't know if you all, but I'm sure a lot of you know that time when you're almost falling asleep and something comes into your head that's like really visual and something going on just before you fall asleep, and you say, that's the most imaginative thing I've ever thought. In my world, in my life, since I was very young, I've actually been able to turn those things into photographs. That's what I do for a living. So I think that act of expressing ourselves can be overwhelming. It can be, and it's almost innate. It's primal even. You know, we sort of, all of us, it's maybe why we have kids, to sort of, to give ourselves, to live forever. You know, that's why we have kids. It's our legacy that goes on. Photographs, to me, I don't have any kids. My photographs are my legacy. So I think it starts with some kind of expression, ends up one day we're erecting the Sistine Chapel, that kind of thing. I think that photography is very elemental, very primal, and yet a wonderful art.
Right?
Okay, well, I started photography because it was fun. And my dad was a photographer, and he showed me different ways of photography, and I thought, wow, this is fun. But the more I got into it, it was still fun. It still is fun. But I found out that I really wanted to communicate something. And first I didn't know what I wanted to communicate, but I thought, well, let's try. And so I thought, to me, the reason I photograph now is really to communicate to you, to an audience hopefully, but also to myself. Maybe experiences that I've had in the past, to relive those again, and ultimately to learn more about myself and to tell you and me who I am. I guess that's
Richard, how would you chime?
All right, I'll build on what Lou said, except mine are in the morning, just before wake. And a lot of my work has grown out of those all of a sudden vivid, very, very vivid images just before waking up. And now as I grow older, the work is gearing very, very autobiographical. The last few series that I've done have taken me back into how I related to the world, or didn't, and how I feel about where I'm going. My most recent series is a bunch of work on, is the life after death. There's the imagery, the figure, there's a skeleton, and there's water. And then there's large black voids. And it's how I'm beginning to deal with my future, if you will. And so it varies. There are times when something just pops into your mind, and then you bring that to fruition in one way or another. Sometimes it's not exactly as you viewed it, and other times you're able to work and get that. And then, again, to reiterate, it's becoming very, very autobiographical. And I was surprised about that. It wasn't anything planned, but one project moved to another project. And a few years ago I had the old family box of snapshots. And all of a sudden they became collages. But they became collages with old negatives I had from a trip to Egypt. And things just started wonderfully falling into place. And,
Can I finish? Because Richard brought up working on a brand new body of work. Because as photographers who've done this over, you sort of get into the. I came upon Jung. What's it? They use his initial CK. What's his?
CG.
What's it?
CG.
CG. Thank you. CG Jung, and he deals with an issue called Archetypes, and I didn't, I'm a physicist and a photographer. I didn't know anything about, I knew about archetypes, but I didn't know where, and Richard mentions that he's got these skeletons, and he's got this water, and these are all archetypes, and a lot of my new work is dealing with these images, but they're not autobiographical other than the archetypes are my archetypes, or at least the things, and he talks a lot about these archetypes being universal, that you can go to any society. I'm not sure whether I believe him yet, but it certainly seems that we regurgitate these kind of archetypes a lot in our society, and I think that those things become our images, and then this ability to make them permanent, whatever the medium, but in our case, photography, and make those skeletons. Mine are people flying and things like that, which become, us, those dreams where you actually think you're flying and stuff like that. And I think that I'm working through a lot of that, and I think that maybe that comes out of this imagery that we have that's part of our person. Photography is a perfect match for that.
It's rather interesting. I jotted down some ideas that I was going to probe. Do you think it is this? Do you think it is that? I didn't need to. They mentioned every single one of them. I think there is a message there too, because we are all looking at the same thing with similar ideas. There is a lot of commonality. Some start photography because it is easy. Some pick it up because you don't need to know how to paint or how to sculpt. It is democratic. It is more egalitarian. Anybody can take a photograph.
But someone took it as because they had to. That's how I got into photography. I had to satisfy my course of studies, I had to take a photography class. Putting it off, putting it off. And then wow.
The other things came through, it's a creative tool, it's a pastime, it's a hobby, it's fun, it is memorable, you're talking about memories. It's about life. Photography is about life. We photograph the world around us, the life as it relates to us and as we relate to it. Throughout the history, humankind have dealt with different ways of expressing their thoughts through images, but there has never been any medium as prolific, in its inherently prolific, as photography. And it is, again, a dual-edged sword. It allows a lot of people to practice photography and expression, but does it lessen its stature as art or potential art? Richard, what do you think? The proliferation of imagery.
Well, we can blame that on George Eastman, can't we? It is with his Kodak One, where everyone could take pictures. What was the question again?
The question is, it is so prolific in its ability to produce images.
Oh.
Is it lessening its artistic dimensions? Everybody can do it, so what's the big deal?
Well, that's interesting. I'll do it as I talk to my students. There's two groups of images, and for lack of better words, I call them snapshots and photographs. Then there's this great big gray area in between. Right? What's a snapshot? Well, I define a snapshot as an extremely personal image. All right, you can relate to it, and very often a snapshot includes another person, so they relate to it. There's a connection between a few people. Whereas the photograph, on the other hand, has a more universal look. In other words, we can look at this image, I don't have to know who that is, but I can get involved in what are the images, what are the relationships of the values. I can just fall in love just because of craft. It's a beautifully crafted print. I'll just sit there and look at it for hours on end. So I say the art side is on the photograph, whereas that personal image, although there's billions are made, it's still something very important to an individual. They made it, they have this relationship to the subject, but unfortunately, I can look at it and I go, you know, oh, well, that's nice, you know, did you enjoy the trip? You know, and move on. Whereas someone else would take the photograph of wherever they were on the trip, and I'll get involved in what it is, how it's put together. I don't have to know exactly where it was, but look at the relationships within the photograph. And
Ray, what do you think?
I don't think it lessens photography as an art because there are so many of us. I'm biased, of course, but
Aren't we all?
I think that if you look at any visual art, you know, certainly there's more photographers than sculptors around. But there's a whole lot of painters, and sketchers, and watercolorists around. And you know, everyone wouldn't say that all of that is art, nor would everyone say that all of what we do is art. But I think that art, you know, art is a very personal interaction between one person and one image to me. And so, yeah, I think it's no less than any other, that as long as that interaction is made. And it could be your son's sketch that brought home from kindergarten, or it could be painting the roof. But you get that personal interaction. It's something that makes you think, makes you
Democratic, egalitarian side of photography allowed millions of people to take billions of photographs since it was first invented in 1800. And when you think about it, anything worth photographing probably has been photographed. Do you think we should stop taking photographs because somebody else has done it?
Actually, you bring up an issue. There are so many people taking so many photographs. And I do, in fact, think that, and just see if you can hold with me just for, I know this is I'm going to take a little right turn here. That, in point of fact, the vast number does, in fact, diminish the effect of any single photograph. You know, diamonds are precious because there's so few of them. You know, that we have that sort of mentality. It's not a good analogy, but it's close. And the fact that there are so many people taking such snapshots, personal, they're only really useful for a very small select bunch of people, and you pick up a snap and say, that's not a great picture, but it may be very personal. That does, in fact, diminish the overall, but let me see if I can remember the thought. I think of photography as a communist art form. Everybody has the right to take pictures. Whether they're good or bad, we all have the inalienable right to take pictures. And that's what makes photography so incredibly wonderful. The turn here is that because we all think we are taking, and I include myself in this, think we are taking great photographs, the better of them don't get seen in the same light as something that has a gatekeeper, like painting or sculpture, a gatekeeper, somebody who you can't be a good painter until you learn how to paint. So photography has this thing where everybody thinks the minute they pick up a camera, you know, you hear people say, what kind of camera do you, oh, that's a great picture, what kind of camera do you have? You know, I heard a writer say, oh, that was a great article, what kind of typewriter do you have? Like, you know, it's really about what you put into it, and those people who develop and become better and better. But we all, because we think this photograph, my photograph of the sunset is the same as Ansel Adams' photograph of the sunset. It's the same rock, same sun. So I think that it does have a little bit of a, it does have the effects of communism. It sort of makes us all the same. And that, okay.
Equalizing
That's
part
right.
that I was referring to. In a way, is it fair to say that the process of making photography makes it always about now? You take a picture of now, but as soon as you take the picture, it becomes then. When you compare it to painting, it is always forward-looking. You are painting something that will finish in the future. Same thing about a sculpture. So photography, in a way, is backward-looking, and other art forms are forward-looking in their process. Is it a fair assessment to say that? Who wants to take this?
Well, it depends on your approach to photography. There's, you know, the pre-visualizers and the post-visualizers. So, I mean, if you're a pre-visualizer, then obviously that solves that question. But if you're a post-visualizer, you're just, at the moment, collecting data.
But think about the process. You cannot take a picture of the next moment.
You have a motor drive.
But it's always this moment. Your motor drive is recording this moment. And as soon as it records, it becomes the past moment. Whereas a painter is putting the brush on the canvas, it's building something into the future that will finish in the future. And in that sense, I want us to see if there's any difference that is stemming from the artistic process that may distinguish photography from other art forms. Not necessarily better or worse, just different.
Well, you're taking the picture at the moment,
That's right.
but you're printing it at another time. And therefore, it could be lighter, it could be darker, it could be, it could have more contrast, it could have less contrast. You burn this, you dodge that. So,
And it can evolve. You can do it this way one day.
right, so it's, well, not to be a snob, but the professional or the artistic photographer will approach it that way because they'll create the image later. The snapshot, of course, is always the present, and always will remain as such. Who was it? Rosenberg, who wrote about Avedon's work, that we see Humphrey Bogart, a portrait of Humphrey Bogart, and we'll always remember Humphrey Bogart. He will always be this way,
Yeah.
even though he's aged and passed on.
Yeah.
This is how we remember Bogart. He will never change.
That's right, it's recorded. Along the same lines of thinking, photography, we talked a little bit about this at dinner. Photography inherently is always of something. You cannot think about photography without it being intrinsically tied to an object. It is a picture of something. Whereas you can talk about an abstract painting that doesn't have to be of anything, or a sculpture, or any other kind of visual art. Is that an advantage for photography or a disadvantage? This intrinsic object relationship.
Well, let me, I'll be a politician and I'll turn that around and ask you the question, that kind of thing, how they do it in those interviews. Yes, I think that photography's invention, and I'm talking about purely on a sort of very surface level, was originally sort of a document. We think we're going to take a picture of that person or that building, you know, and there were the arguments in the early days, is photography going to replace, make painting obsolete, which it never did, but we were, yes, it's an object. But I think that photography, because of its very nature, is so much more different from the other art forms. I mean, we think it's close, but it really is just often its own thing. And what happens is you can create, and to answer the last question at the same time, some artist told me, or I read somewhere, that photography is always a work in progress. We're always, and the minute you stop, that work in progress is finished. So we're working on sequences, so that, yes, maybe a moment, but we're working on sequence. So we're thinking about this in sequence with another, with a body of work, with a portfolio. We're thinking about that whole thing, and that the minute we are not, it's not no longer, the minute we finish, we're dead. You know, that you are dead as an artist, so that kind of thing. So I never think of it, my work as being precious only that moment. I'm working on something related. And I forgot the question again because I was going to go.
The question was, it's of something. In this object relation, does it detract from photography or does it help photography?
When you say object, are you talking the object it's a rock, or the object, the photograph itself is an object?
No, not the photograph per se. I'm talking about the subject of photography, whether it is distorted, abstracted, etc. It is the result of light reflecting off of something else. In that sense, any photograph is directly linked to something in real life.
Well, as I said, I think I did, I still kind of disagree, because Minor White, most of his images are metaphors.
Yeah.
And he planned them as metaphors. In other words, when he was out taking pictures, he would look at something, and the one that comes right to mind, he saw the side of a barn. It was divided into 3 parts. And on the left side is a broken window. On the right side is a window that reflects the clouds. And in the middle, there is just clapboards. And all of a sudden, he says, my God, birth, life, and death. So it's not really a barn.
I'm not talking about the message of the photograph. I'm talking about the process of making a photograph. He had to have that barn to express that idea, unlike a painter who could have thought of it and started painting it without even a barn like that existing.
Think about Jackson Pollock. I'm thinking about Jackson Pollock as you said that. You can't see anything in his paintings.
Yep.
But I would bet you, and he was probably drunk most of the time when he did it, and maybe a little mentally ill. But I bet he had something in mind when he was doing it, and his craft was not like this. It was all day by himself drawing paint around. But I bet he had something in mind. So maybe that object is not necessarily out there, but it's in here, and for both mediums, but more so perhaps for.
So would you say that a photograph is more like a mirror or a window?
To who? To the viewer or
Yeah,
to
it's
the
different
maker?
things to different people.
Take your perspective. Anyway.
Well, for me, I guess it's becoming a mirror, whether I planned it or not. For the viewer, it's certainly a window.
I'm always, I fight with my colleagues about that in a much more pedestrian way, but my photographs are I would say 99% of the time about the outside world. Things that I would not, I go to Sri Lanka to take pictures of Sri Lanka. Now I may see a puddle of water and a thing in the water, and that I could have taken that right across the street from my studio, but I go there to be as far away from my environment to discover that environment. I'm not talking about, now of course, as artists, we're always looking at things that are our perspective, so they can never be about anything other than my perspective. But I'm always, and as Richard says, his are becoming increasingly more autobiographical, so he's becoming more introspective, and my whole thing is to try to, literally, to try to become more extroverted in my photography, to bring back things that you'll never see. You know, you'll never be here. So that's what my whole thing is. So I think that photography, and to deal with it, again, the last issue about photography is probably one of the few, if maybe not the only, art form in which you have to be there. So that's the way I don't see it. I never saw it as object, but if you want to get that deer in the winter, you got to be out there cold. Herman Melville wrote possibly the most important novel in American history. He never was on a boat. You know, so he didn't have to be there. So that stuff was in his imagination, or from a story that somebody told him, or pieces of, but if you want to shoot a war, the bullets are flying over your head, you know, that kind of thing. So, the object but I think that that's what makes photography unique.
I would agree. So you are also thinking along the lines of photography when a viewer looks at it as a window that shows someplace else. It is something like a teleportation device. You look at it, you see the mountain, you see the puddle, you see the people, you see whatever else the photographer is showing you. But think for a moment how we look at a statue. You don't see it as a window to see something else. It is the thing that is distinctly different from photography. Is it coming from the fact that one is always about something else? As you said, you need to be out there in the winter taking the picture of that deer being cold or in war, etc. So if it is a window, then it is not the thing itself. When you look at a photograph, are you looking at a flat surface on which there is some apparition, or are you looking through it to see the real thing in your mind? Ray, what do you think?
Personally, or just?
However you want it, it's your thought.
I was thinking about this summer. I was sitting on a beach, and I wanted to write about the beach, and so I started writing. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be better to take a picture of the beach? And then I thought, well, you can't feel the wind in the picture, and you don't know how cold it is. And you can't hear little kids playing over there with their sandcastle. And so, but you can take a beautiful picture of everything else that was there. So maybe for me, photography is a window, a means to an end. But at the same time, you can only use your own personal fund of knowledge to interpret what you see. So it's also a mirror at the same time.
The reason I use the window and the mirror metaphors is that when you look at a mirror, you either see your reflection, which is behind the mirror, at a distance equal to your distance to the mirror, but you do not see the surface of the mirror unless you look at the surface of the mirror to see a spot on it. But as soon as you see that spot, you don't see yourself. Your reflection becomes hazy, out of focus. Now, the reason that I want us to realize or think about how we look at photographs is the photograph becoming like that spot on the mirror, when I look through it and see something else, am I not seeing the real thing that is in front of me? And isn't, what part of photography is art? What is behind the paper that we project, transport, and see, or what is on the paper that the photographer recorded and interpreted and showed it to us? Are we trying to take mundane pictures of great things or great pictures of mundane things? Is there a distinction? Or should there be? Is it relevant?
There's a wonderful, again, I don't want to take, but I had a wonderful photographer. He's now quite elderly, but he was probably one of the best, I think he's still alive, architectural photographers in the last, 50 years or so. And I'm trying to remember his name. I can't believe it's Eric. He lives in Connecticut. He's still around. If anybody can help me with that. Anyway, he was talking to one of his clients, commercial photographer, unbelievable body of work of shooting all kinds of buildings, a real master. And the client was complaining, this is years ago, sort of in his formative days. He was famous, but still his formative. And the client said, you're so expensive. You're amazingly expensive. Why would I want to pay $1,000? That's cheap in those days. Why would I want to pay $1,000 for this photograph? It's just too much. And he says, you've got this. How long did it take you to build this building? The guy said, this is a 4-year project. And he says, that's a beautiful building. That's an amazing building. But very few people will actually see that building. Millions will see my photograph. And he got paid. So the point is that you are right. It is an object, but it is, again, the uniqueness of photography. We are taking pictures, whether it be the innermost parts of our imagination and brain, and things that don't even exist in real life, but we put them together in a picture, or we may be just a perfect representation of our wedding. They are a representation of that moment and that thing, but that photograph will outlast our memory of it, and it becomes its own piece of history in and of
It becomes
itself.
the reality.
It becomes exactly right. Exactly right. That's unique about photography.
So if we say this is the photograph, the message in the photograph and the way it is presented is on the surface. And the art can be on the surface or behind it. And yeah, go ahead. It's both. And is one side of photography or one side of this photographic art more significant than the other? Are we looking at photographs? I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Are we looking at the photographs at the expense of something else? Are we not seeing the graphic, the art that is inherent in the printed surface for the person behind it who is on a death row? Is this person being on the death row more significant than Lou Jones' rendering of it, which is only on the surface?
It's dependent upon the viewer. Take, for example, a sociologist would sit down on that book and get a whole series of ideas from it. I would sit down on that book and I get a whole different series of ideas because we're coming from different places and we're bringing out different educational experiences with it. I think the more you learn about seeing and the more people get involved with groups like this who talk about pictures, I think the more you get out of the pictures and you perhaps get beyond the surface. But sometimes the surface can be so wonderful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why I think we need to appreciate the trade-off when we look at the subject and fascinated by the subject and forget the photograph as a piece of art. So it is not only the message, but message is also an important part of the photograph.
If I may, there was a Russian cinematographer, and I think he was part of the constructivist group, so forth, and his name was Podolkin. And he said, to show something as everyone sees it is to have accomplished nothing. And I always lay that down right on the photo line. And yeah, it's the idea that everybody goes by this building, and one or two people will stop by and maybe take a picture of it, and then somebody will pick up Architectural Digest or Architectural Record and see that photograph by that man and go, oh my goodness, I've never seen that before. Just look at the way those shapes play out of each other.
Let's talk a little bit about art. Fine art photography, you're all fine art photographers, and there are a lot of our members who are in that bend. I'm thinking of fine art photography, and I'm also thinking of a concert pianist. Now, can you imagine a concert pianist occasionally playing or practicing piano? We cannot imagine that the people who are virtuoso performers not only practice piano, they exercise, they do breathing and conditioning, etc., so that they can be at their peak. Can fine art photography be an occasional endeavor for people?
Well, if we're talking about the arts, sure.
I think it happens sometimes whether you want it to or not, whether you're not meant to do it or not. It happens. I mean, because we bring to our images our experience and our imagination, but our imagination is still, I mean, it's just basically the freedom we allow ourselves.
Yep.
And at some point, we learned our craft. Man, when I'm talking that the given is you know your craft.
Mhm. But let me probably rephrase that. I'm not, when I say, can you engage in photography occasionally, I don't necessarily mean grab the camera, shoot the film, develop it, etc. I mean mentally engage in photography. Are there days that go by you don't think about photography?
Well, I don't know. I'm always looking at pictures.
You're always looking at pictures.
Whether I mean, I'm not necessarily speaking about books,
Mhm.
but I'll stand in the window and you look
Mhm.
out and
Yep,
you get engaged.
that's
And-
what I mean, yes.
And it's with the photographic eye. The only kind of eye I have now, but
So you see something, you say, oh,
Yeah.
that's nice.
I don't consciously say, oh, I wish I had my camera. No.
But you take a mental photograph of it.
Yeah.
It is an engagement in photography.
Yeah. Well, I'm always framing.
So is it fair then to conclude, if you want to get into fine art photography, you need to engage in photography, not necessarily by taking pictures, but thinking about it, or mentally shooting some images, or observing different frames, so that your eye will become keener and sharper.
I think that we, the more you want to become a photographer, and that can be, you can have your own profession, discover photography well into your life, and one day say, I really love this, and just start to look at pictures, and I'm going to go practice this, and you can say, I'm going to go out every Saturday. It happens. It happens. I'm going to go every Saturday, I'm going to take pictures, and that can be your sometime. But if you are motivated by photography, whether it be as a teacher, as a practitioner, just trying to increase, the unique thing is that you can literally look out into the world and you can kind of do that all the time. You know, you can look at your shoes, you can wake up in the morning and look at your ceiling, you can say, ooh, and you can actually train yourself to do that, so that you're looking all the time. And at some point, it becomes such second nature that you don't even know that that's what you're doing. You're looking all the time. You're maybe not doing that and putting framework, but I noticed years ago that if I'm in a country and I'm shooting for an assignment or something, and I'm walking down the street, and I do a lot of just walking, and looking, and looking. And that's concentrated, but I noticed that all the photographs are taken over here. Peripheral vision. It's not what I'm seeing in front of me, it's over here. And not only that, but I'm walking down the street looking, I think I'm looking at, look, and the picture is over, so I go, ooh, and the instant that it's over here, right here, I'm looking over here, and it's right there. The picture is taken. It's done. I move, I take it, I've decided what lens I'm going to use, I've decided whether it's horizontal, vertical, I've decided it's all done.
Cartier-Bresson over here, huh?
No, I don't know where it comes from, but it's just, boom. It's like, that's the photograph. And I don't even see it until oh, look at that, I click. I make all of those decisions. I write in my book, the other book, I talk about that. Somebody said that you're able to think about and make decisions at a level of about 200 to 300 things at any given time. So if somebody sticks a little needle in your head and goes, you don't remember that you're in this room 20 years from now, but your head will go and know that there's the mail over there and and the coats over there, and you can see the lights, and your brain records all of that. Well, the same thing happens when you're taking a photograph. When you're taking a photograph, boom, you're deciding where you're going to put the horizon, whether you're going to tilt the camera, whether it's, where the person's going to be, how much are they going to be off center. There are hundreds. What f-stop. All of that stuff is being decided within
Split second, and
the
that
60th of a
is,
second.
that is what I'm talking about, engaging in photography
Right.
all the time. It is not a pastime
Right.
activity if you want to sharpen the fine art keenness in your images. There is probably a misconception that you need to produce a lot of work to produce fine art. And I read in several places that Ansel Adams said, in a good year, I may produce 10 good photographs. In a good year, he may produce 10 photographs. What is the message there, Ray? Is it too little, too many?
He probably took about 1,000.
Oh,
And,
okay.
but the fact that he kept doing it, like he said, that moment came up and it was a great picture. But he kept doing it, so he just didn't stop. Like you say, you're looking all the time. Yeah, I think that's it.
So the body of work doesn't need to be humongous for it to convey something, right? So it's not how many you have, but how well you have seen.
You may help me here. Wasn't it John Sarkowski at curator at MoMA who said you only have 10 years? Didn't I hear that? Am I crazy? He said that in a photographer's creative lifetime, you only have 10 years to produce your best work.
And that comes after you shoot 10,000 photographs.
That's right. He's saying that, you hit them, you may be doing it for a long, long time, but boom, it hits, and then all of a sudden you start to create, and then The rest of it is just, he's, you know, I don't, again, I'm not agreeing with him, but he was saying that's the only, in the way he curated, that was the only, that during that period was the only work that he was really interested in. At least that's the way I interpreted what he was saying. So I find that that's a very, that's scary.
Well, it's better than athletes.
Mine's the next 10 years.
Which side of that 10 are
Exactly. It's scary, huh?
Fine art photography, I have been thinking about it and reading about it, and I have formulated the ingredients for us to knock down, add, subtract, or multiply. In order for photography to be fine art, I think it needs an idea more than anything else. That's, I think, one ingredient I see. It needs to be intentionally presented. I intend to show this. It needs to convey that. And it needs commitment. I'm committed to this rendering of this image rather than, while I'm working on it, if you don't like it, I can change my mind. You know, all of a sudden, about 15, 20 years ago, my students started talking with a funny accent. Well, where are you from? I'm from New York. Meaning, if you don't like it, I'll change it. It's that inquisitive question. In photography, we can do the same thing. Well, here's something. If you like it, I'm going to commit to it. If you don't, I can change it. But I think it needs a self-decided, self-assured commitment. I think a piece of art needs to be viewed and appreciated on demand. Therefore, I'm thinking probably too restrictively, but I'm thinking printed material. It needs to be picked up or looked at without the need of a computer or a slide projector. And obviously, it needs to have technical excellence of some sort. What do you think about these requirements? Are they too narrow, too broad, too foolish? Richard, what do you think?
Foolish.
Hey, it's my job to think of these goofy things so I can get your talk.
All right. What is a fine art photograph?
What we got,
Well, I'll agree about the message. I will agree about, to a certain extent, craft. There are some great photographs that are grab shots and were, shot that way. And it didn't matter if there's dust on them or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It depends on what, again, on what you want to say. And that'll stand up to time. I'm not saying it has a universal message, but it's a message that will stand up. In other words, will we look at that print 10 years from now and enjoy it as much, or find the message as important then as we find the message now?
What do you think about printed as opposed to projected? Does it matter?
I don't think it matters. It matters to me, personally. You know, whenever I go to a photography show, I always want to take a picture of the room and hold it. And you can't do that with projected images. But I will totally accept, you know, the video and slide collections and so forth of the museum. Because that's the true material, what the artist wanted to say. So I just, it varies accordingly, but I think probably will it stand up?
I think that you've taken on an awfully big, you know, to try to define this. I'm proud of you. But I travel a lot, and I find that the thing that different cultures accept as if we were able to use that word fine art and it translated to whatever language, changes dramatically. So that something that one culture was at, another culture doesn't have a clue. So I think that you have to, when you do your definition, if you're going to be more universal, it really has to. I think that test of time, I have to think about that. I like that. I like that, but I don't know. In today's world, it's hard to know what's going to be here by the time we get out of here, to say, you know, it's, I find that my ideas of what photography were and what, you know, craft, I always thought craft, you know, the wonderful printers that make these Ansel, you see these prints and you just go, oh, you just like, you know, you're standing horizontal and as you look at them, you get, and you just fall over into them because they're so gorgeous. Craft, amazing. But today, craft is a secondary, if not tertiary idea. I'm not even sure that in many of the artists that are being shown, the Starn twins, you know, that phenomenon, and the stuff, if you look at it, when you see it, it's pretty provocative. You know, it's provocative, and they were just making prints in the darkroom and slapping them together, and
They still together? I haven't heard
Twins.
anything about them in the longest time.
still around.
After they mutilated all their prints, they started mutilating each other probably.
It's a good question. And there's your permanence. I don't know. Craft, and then the last is an idea. Which again, you know, I stayed with for a long time, and I go, what's happened with that even is that sometimes now, and Jerry Uelsman talks about this, he's a very funny guy, very funny guy, very clever. He talks about it that the idea sometimes transcends the object itself, and he just doesn't get that. And I agree, but still, you know, the idea behind what we're seeing is sometimes, he says, you know, you see those shows where the artist statement is longer than the title of the photograph is longer than the artist statement, you know, that kind of thing. So, it's a hard, you're taking a tough one.
But think about Jerry Uelsman's photographs. Isn't it all about his ideas?
Yeah, but he even says he's a dinosaur.
I know, but the fundamental thing that makes his photographs compelling is that he conceived of this idea and committed to this floating root structure as opposed to another floating root structure. So I think, is it fair to say then, art happens at the intersection of ideas and photographs? When they properly intersect, at that intersection, there may be art. So there may be ideas floating, no photographs. There may be photographs that do not have any idea behind them. But when they intersect, when our ideas are executed into photographs, and when they really click, you know this is really working. And when it happens, you know it. This is it. You don't even need to look at the negative or the screen. You got the photograph, you know it. And is that the intersection of the idea and the photograph, the execution, creating that piece of art?
A whole lot of exceptions.
You
Well,
say
I'm not
either,
something
you
they
do.
can
On the
agree
whole.
On the whole.
Yeah, there are exceptions.
Yes.
Speaking of Uelsman, I think it's interesting, and only time will tell, is the digital camera destroying Uelsman? Is Photoshop destroying Uelsman?
You know,
Destroying.
again, if I don't have his idea, I can have all the tools I have. I need to have that idea to create his images, and they are uniquely his. I mean, I can imitate him, but they will look at it, okay, he is imitating Jerry Uelsman. And it will never be Jeremiah Kid.
there was something you touched on earlier that I wanted to talk about, so a little off the point.
Good.
But you talked about projected images versus printed images and how do they fit in as art. I think they fit in differently. But I think a projected image you can look at for a print, you can look at for a long period of time. You can just have it there, and the paper's not going to disintegrate for a long time. A slide, you can't do that. But what you can do with a slide, and I learned this from a good friend of mine, who's a very creative slideshow producer, and he affected me obviously a lot. What you can do in a slideshow is produce a cumulative effect. And that's partly here, but it's also partly physically a chemical thing in your brain, because there's complementary colors. And if you're looking at this red, not really red, he's got a nice red, Barbara's got a nice red jacket on. Well, if I look at her long enough, that jacket, and I look away, I'm going to see green. So if you see a series of images, that image may go away after 5 or 10 seconds, but you're still seeing, your brain is still seeing the complement in your screen. And over a period of a half hour or an hour, that builds up a tremendous amount of activity in your brain that I think, to me, is art, and extremely moving for me. Got me going in the direction I'm in now. So I think it's a different kind of experience, but I mean, and both are equally valid.
As I said, I think of these goofy things to get you guys talking.
But I will say, the craft of Usman will remain forever. Amazing craft.
He's unique. I mean, people have tried to copy him, but he's unique.
Extraordinarily creative and artistic. Do we produce different kinds of photographs when we are shooting for art, commercial, salon, hobby? Or is there, again, an intersection of all of these? Do you do more commercial than any of us?
When you have the perfect client, the lines get blurred. Of course you have the client that just wants you to really
Those of you who are old enough will remember what I'm talking about. If you see a photograph of a woman kneeling down next to a body laying on the ground and screaming, you know that there is a dead body and she is expressing her frustration, and there are young people standing around her. This picture was taken, I believe, in 1969 at Kent State. Now, does it have the same meaning, same impact, same message for Generation Y, who do not know probably what Kent State was? Ray, what do you think?
I mean, people with no knowledge of their history, they would just have to go by her expression.
Yeah.
And certainly the human face is the most, in any image, is a human face in it. That's what we look at. So that's what they have.
Does it have the same message? Does it have the same strength, same...
No,
No, so that's not a different time.
no, because we can all
And I
remember our
remember that.
Yeah.
visceral
Yeah.
reactions of seeing that on the news and so forth. And today, you got to write an essay to go with it for them to get any sense of what it is. They know it was, I mean, if you say it was a peace demonstration, they won't know in what context you're talking about. I mean, it has to be really specific.
So in that sense, then, it has not endured the test of time.
No, I beg to differ. Photography, again, this is all I do is photography, so you have to understand that I'm a little prejudiced.
Aren't we all?
But that photograph, that exact photograph you're talking about, and somebody who can be 18 years old, has no context for that. But at the same time, that same photograph is as close to universal language as we have invented in our history yet. So that won't have the same visceral response, but there's a lot going on in that picture that tells the person, the viewer, something significant is happening, and that this is as close to creating that message without having to use words. We don't need that photo essay. The photo essay certainly gives us a better context, but that universal language. So we can actually go halfway around the world and take a picture of something, a family, a family unit, 4 or 5 people, eating, and that picture translates all the way through all of that stuff and gives us an idea. You know, I had somebody said to me a couple of years ago when they saw a photograph, they said, they saw a photograph of mine, I think it was in Central America, somewhere in, no, it was probably Africa, sorry, in Africa, and somebody, they were young people, and they said, oh my God, they had dirt floors. And you know, that was just like, went right over my, I just went, oh my God, here's somebody who has grown up in which there are 6 billion people in the world, and they had no context for the fact that there are people who live in every day in their house, and it's a nice little house that has a dirt floor.
But that, I appreciate where you're coming from. But when you think about that photograph, if you do not have the context, she could be terribly upset because her friend fell off from the back of the truck while doing a stunt. Therefore, the reaction that was shown in the context of time will be significantly different. Yes, it is obviously an expression of sorrow, disappointment, etc., but it is not the same message. It is not the same photograph without having that context around it. That is extremely, in that case, time dependent.
What is the context for W. Gene Smith's photograph of the 2 little kids walking into the tunnel of light? You know, I don't know. Do I need to? Not always. I think that there's a universal language, and it's not purely. It doesn't.
That works on that's a different plane.
That's right.
Yeah, but yes, it does. But it's a lot closer to the point than anything else we have.
Let me use another example. In the past, photographers and families took pictures of their children in the nude. 30, 40, 50 years ago, there was nothing about it. Now try to do it today.
Try to get a film process.
Try to get the film process.
Go to jail.
Now there is a time-sensitive photograph. As we change, so do the way we see, and so do the norms of the society. And therefore, at least some photographs will need that time context, and without that, it will be difficult to, in fact, enjoy or do at the same time with photography. So context is not only time, but other contexts may be important. Like we talked about the body of work. You mentioned, I think all of you mentioned the words body of work. We talk about the body of work of an artist. Why do we do that? Because they collectively provide a context for that person's vision, that person's style. It evolves. You know, you can tell a Jerry Wilson without even thinking twice. And most of the time you can tell an Ansel Adams. You can tell Ira White. He tried to photograph what else it is rather than what it is. And in commercial work, you have a context working with the client, the art director, etc. And these are all part of any single photograph that we look at. Is that a fair statement? In other words, we do not look at images in isolation. At least as they become more and more artistic expression, it becomes part of the rest of the work.
The rest of the work, mean the body of
Body of that photographer's work
Oh, okay.
in the style that he or she has developed.
I agree with everything you said. I think that's, again, a wonderful, but I'm going to go back to that photograph, and everybody's going to help me here. I think it was a Roosevelt, where the fellow was crying, had the little tear, black guy with the uniformed hat on. I think he was in a band, and he was crying. I think it was at Roosevelt's funeral.
Funeral.
It wasn't,
Yes.
wasn't it Roosevelt's funeral?
Yeah.
I don't even remember the photographer. But that photograph is shown out of context all the time. And and I know that you're saying that that's not the same thing, but it is the transcendence of what photograph is, even though we don't know it's Roosevelt, we don't know it's a funeral, we don't know who this guy is, and it really is we have an emotional response to the person on the ground, even if that person fell off the end of a truck. You know, it's the only way to get any closer to that is exactly what you say, is to write an essay under it, and then you have to know the language in which that essay was written. And even on top of that, the context of age and things like that are important.
Well, there are other things that I want to talk about, but I think we are running a little out of time and patience. So I am going to leave some of this for a later time, and I would like to present a challenge for all of us at PSRI for this summer. You have heard what artists talk about photography, what they say about photography, and how they view photography. I want us to think about an idea, and during the summer, produce 5 prints. That is the result of your expression of that idea, and that's tried so that they stand not only as individual photographs, but also as a collective body of work of 5. Small, but nevertheless, it is a unified body of work. And to level the playing field, not everyone has big printers. I think we should stick with no more than 8.5 by 11 paper size. In fact, I think we should all stick to that size, and print it small so that we also equalize the processing differences, quality differences in the workflow, etc. Printed 5 by 7 on 8.5 by 11, and see if we can express an idea, any idea that you can think of, that you can conceive of. It could be a particular color, it could be a particular object, it could be a particular district, it could be faces, places, anything you like. But what I challenge you to do is to use the creative eye that our guests have talked about and produce that body of work that we will look at when we come back for 2007-2008 season, and we will say, this is what I executed, and let's see if we can find the intersection of ideas and photographs. I thank you all very much for being with us tonight. We have learned a great deal. There is a lot more to discover, and I thank you a lot for your patience. Now, let's go draw some.